The latest on the Israel-Hamas war, the Israeli bombardment intensifying with explosions near a hospital rattling Gaza, even as Israel agrees to expand combat pauses to allow Palestinians to evacuate.
There is an urgent effort right now to win the release of some of the hostages held in Gaza by Hamas and an allied group. Matt Gutman starts us off from Tel Aviv. Good morning, Matt.
Hey, good morning, George. The U.S. is starting to express increasing concern about that death toll in Gaza. This morning, Secretary of State Blinken saying much more needs to be done to protect Palestinian civilians. But he is acknowledging the two things that Israel is doing right now, opening up those humanitarian corridors for several hours. We've seen thousands of people trudging on foot to safer areas, but also creating those 4-hour combat pauses. But it's unclear when the two overlap.
Overnight, thundering explosions rattling at least 2 Gaza hospitals. Fireballs shooting skyward, people scrambling for cover. The Israeli bombardment intensifying near 2 of Gaza's main hospitals where Israel claims Hamas has command posts. With the death toll in Gaza soaring, Hamas-run authorities put it at over 10,000. The White House saying Israel has agreed to 4-hour combat pauses in northern Gaza to allow civilians to evacuate. Israel releasing this video today of thousands fleeing on foot, a tank in the foreground, saying more than 120,000 have made it through to safer areas in southern Gaza. Rami Massoud reunited with his family for the first time in weeks. His wife recounting a nightmarish journey on foot, dead bodies on the ground, bullets flying over the heads of her and her children. The White House has quietly been pressing Israel for longer pauses. This morning, Secretary of State Blinken voicing his frustration.
Much more needs to be done to protect civilians and to make sure that the humanitarian assistance reaches them. Far too many Palestinians have been killed.
The White House increasingly concerned this war could trigger a wider regional conflict. Overnight, the U.S. struck what it says are Iranian-backed forces in Syria, the second such retaliatory strike. And it all comes as the lives of 239 hostages in Gaza hang in the balance. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad releasing video of 77-year-old Hannah Katsir and 12-year-old Yagil Yaakov. The hostages pleading for Israel to expedite negotiations for their release. ABC News isn't showing it, but the families agreed to us using these images. Yagil's mother, Renana, whose other son was also kidnapped, has called the situation a nightmare.
They're not bargain chips, they're children. Children anywhere in the world are not supposed to be part of this.
On October 7th, Hamas carting entire families into Gaza, one of the most infamous videos showing Shiri Bibas in terror clutching her little boys, those red heads poking out.
If Shiri were listening and could hear what you say, what would you tell her?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry it's taking so long. Every day probably seems like a year.
And here in this poster, you can see a picture of now 10-month-old Kfir, Shiri's son. Now, we know there are intense negotiations to free the hostages. A senior U.S. official telling us that CIA Director Burns has met with the head of the Israeli Mossad and the Qatari Prime Minister to discuss this. But apparently we're now talking about a smaller deal than was being discussed just a few weeks ago. George.
Okay, Matt, thanks. Let's get more on that right now from our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning, George. Well, the White House is heralding this morning these new 4-hour pauses, but it's clear that frustration is growing here. The president with some rare criticism of Netanyahu, saying that he was actually pushing for longer pauses, that he wished Netanyahu had acted sooner, that it took the Israeli prime minister simply too long to meet Biden's request here. Now, the Israelis are downplaying this announcement. They say that these 4-hour pauses are no different from what they've been doing, that there isn't a shift here. But the White House says this is now an expanded effort. The hope, of course, is that this will allow time for more aid to get into Gaza and civilians to get out. And the White House is also hoping that this could help advance efforts to release these hostages. The president remains optimistic. They are working around the clock on this. Yesterday, the head of the CIA was in Qatar meeting with the prime minister there, and the head of the Israeli intelligence service is trying to secure a deal to get them released. The president saying he is doing everything he can, George, to bring them home.
Mary Bruce, thanks. Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.